During the WGA and SAG strike, I found myself having a lot of time on my hands. Because there were barely any big projects that I was really excited about being released during this time, for, good reason, I felt like, okay, well, I gotta watch something. I watch TV all the time. I need it! So I ended up returning to one of my old guilty pleasures, and that is Bravo. I spent a lot of my tween years watching Bravo, and I think if you were to ask high school and even college version of me, I would deny it completely.
Please?
I'm over that. Done with it.
I got dragged back in to the Below Deck seasons, the new season of Roni, a show that I historically really wasn't following that much. And I also got into Summer House, which, oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts. But you're probably wondering if you, clicked on this video and saw the thumbnail and the title, where I'm even going with this. To put it frank, I think it's interesting that when people are watching shows like The Real Housewives of New York, Atlanta, Salt Lake City, it's really easy to see how a show that focused on the inner machinations of a social group, especially a social group that is in a certain class bracket, and I guess with that afforded a certain level of privilege. When I saw season 2 of The Gilded Age drop, I noticed that there was a lot of questions about why people were really even interested in this show to begin with. And the common denominator that I kept finding was that they felt that the show was boring and, didn't really have a lot of things going on in terms of stakes.
That's my opinion!
You could turn this argument back on reality TV shows, especially the Real Housewives series. Now, my whole point of this video is to not compare the two. We're not doing that here. But I just thought it was really interesting that this is pretty much that. It's just fictionalized, and it's mostly fictionalized because it's historical. So where is the disconnect here? And I thought it would be really cool to just kind of dig into this show and to kind of show why I think that, if you haven't decided to watch it, if you are curious, why it's worth your time. But before we get into our spoiler review to The Gilded Age, I want to say hello, welcome to the channel. Please go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, go ahead and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video here on Critical Commentary. Before I get into the plot dynamics that happen into the show and my feelings about it, I thought it would probably make some sense to give you a little bit of context into Julian Fellows as someone who honestly watches way too many of his series. Really, I need to stop.
This is a problem for me.
I just started Belgravia. Chapter 2. I don't know what I'm doing. Lord Julian Fellows is actually a baron and has peerage within the House of Lords in the UK. So this is one of those kinds of genres. When someone says, write what you know, Julian Fellows writes what he knows. And that's what makes him a fairly phenomenal storyteller. He is kind of the British Perez Hilton of historical rich and elite. Now, at the same time, I do believe that he is a royalist and that there are some political things I don't agree with him. But I do think that he is definitely trying to use the shows that he produces and writes as a way of exploring those dynamics a little bit more. It's very interesting that even in Downton Abbey, Julian Fellows had a in-the-closet gay character that actually started off being kind of a villain and ended up turning into an anti-hero that I feel like a lot of people ended up loving and sympathizing with. At the same time, people of Downton Abbey also had a critique of Julian Fellows' relationship with Black people and race. I think that is another reason why The Gilded Age is the way it is. We have a character that is closeted and LGBTQ, and we also have a main Black character. So while there are some critiques that I guess are very much valid, I will say as someone who has been watching these other series and not seeing myself, I'm actually getting to learn a history that I don't think was ever really offered in my history books or classes. The Gilded Age is a really interesting time because the Reconstruction period happened during this time of industrialization. There was a chance for a lot of class growth, and I think with that came a lot of changing of traditions. And I think this is where the bootstrap mentality that you hear being really associated with a lot of Americana propaganda, I think this is where a lot of it came from. I think that this was also a really, significant time politically because of that. To see this show is actually really interesting because you're not just getting a insight into this drama, you're also learning about something that I think was never really offered to us. And while yes, it is a little whitewashed and it is a little bit leaning in the side of the predictable, I love that at the end of every episode, I find myself on Google for like an extra hour and a half before I go to bed at night, because I find that I'm looking up people that they're name dropping in this show. And I think that that allows me to start following different people's histories that I never was privy to before. And I think that is the hidden gem of Julian Fellows' work. Julian Fellows loves to write upstairs, downstairs tales that focus on both the elite as well as the working class people that serve them. The working class people serve as a contrast because they work for the elite. They have a different understanding of the people that we are seeing. So when we see them putting on airs, they offer as this contrarian to bring this person back down to earth. They're the ones who will openly criticize or even defend, depending on what that behavior is or what is happening. And it also gives you an idea of like who you should be rooting for. Okay, so recap. I had to draw like a web because there are so many characters in this show, and I swear I was like, I want to get to kind of all of them, or at least mention everybody, but at the same time, this is not one of those videos where I'm just like webbing everything together and doing an unhinged rant about how everyone's connected. This is not that kind of video. So I'm gonna kind of like work the way that I kind of organized my thoughts on my little sticky note. I do actually have notes, but my web is on a sticky note. Marian is just getting over the bamboozle and breakup with Mr. Rakes from season 1 and has decided that she doesn't really want to pursue any suitors right now and is deciding to work as an art teacher at Constance Billard.
You done lost your damn mind.
I'm a little bit funny, okay?
Really?
While she's working at this art school, she ends up honestly creating an entire rift between Aunt Agnes and Aunt Ada. Aunt Agnes does not like the fact that Marian is working and feels like honestly it sends a bad sign about their family to the rest of Knickerbocker, New York. And Ada is kind of like, whatever. Do you, girl, do you? Aunt Ada actually has like her own storyline. She pretty much marries a big walking deus ex machina.
It was awkward for sure.
While Marian is working at this school teaching art, she ends up having a really cute mentor, big sister relationship with one of her students. And somehow, by coincidence, Julian Fellows, that little girl is actually a distant cousin of Marian and has a father who is recently widowed, very rich, and pretty good looking.
What more could a girl ask for?
The thirst is real. The thirst is real.
Cousin Dashiell is very much interested in Marian and kind of pursues her in a somewhat consensual but not completely kind of way. And I think that there's a lot going on there that needs to be unpacked, but we will put a pin in that. Oscar is also dealing with his own, I guess, kind of breakup. Mostly it's the fact that he has been denied access to Gladys in terms of courting her. And so because he can't court Gladys, he ends up meeting this other woman named Maud Beaton, who is very, very cute in her pinks and pastels, but is not as innocent as she comes across.
The only thing that is artificial or fake about me.
Now, Peggy has a pretty isolated story. I will say that that is one of my negative points. I do wish that there was a little bit more integration. I know that they can't really do that because at the end of the day, this is still during a segregated New York. So it's not like Peggy can really be at all the big events where all the drama happens. But I just wish that there was a little bit more Van Ryn home scenes with the four of them. And I feel like that was just like kind of relegated to the last half of the season. And I don't know, I was just missing a little bit more of that. I think their dynamic as a little like quartet is cute. Peggy at the beginning of season 2 is just finding out that the son that she was kind of taken away from has passed. Both the mother that was raising him and the son. And so she is in mourning at the beginning of season 2. This was kind of a really like deep feeling. I don't know. I felt very visceral with this. I did not love the child storyline for her in season 1. And I feel like this was a little bit of a writing decision change because it was almost like they wanted to not really have her encumbered by something like this. And I don't know, the death was just kind of, it was a lot, but I mean, the Gilded Age does things like that. Because she's in mourning, she ends up deciding to take some space between her parents. So she moves out of her home in Brooklyn and back in with the Van Ryns and goes back to pretty much working at the Globe as her main job and then working as a secretary for Aunt Agnes. While she's working at the Globe, she develops a bit of a romance with her boss. I don't want to get into it. I'm glad that they broke up. Come for me. I don't care.
I said what I said.
She deserves better. That's all I'm saying. There's also a bit of a, there's an Alabama episode, and I'll get into the Alabama episode a little bit later because I do have some thoughts about kind of how everything went down specifically. The biggest piece of drama that goes on in this season is the Battle of the Opera. Pretty much between Bertha Russell and Mrs. Astor, they are trying to figure out who is going to have the biggest opera season opening. Bertha Russell is the head for the restoration of the Met, which is pretty much going to be housing a lot of the new money.
Academy are very determined it should not succeed.
You'll need to pick a team.
But Bertha needs some of the old money that are very much loyal to Mrs. Astor and the Academy to swap over so that she can have some legitimacy and so that she can, I guess, win the war.
You're having a moment. Enjoy it.
Bertha's arc this season was insane. I already kind of knew that this was going to happen this season simply because I am a big fan of the Vanderbilts. I love studying Alva Vanderbilt and Consuelo Vanderbilt, and it's pretty much following their relationship to a T at this point. So I knew that the whole Duke storyline was going to work out the way it did.
You're sitting next to her at dinner.
I don't know if George realized it yet, but I definitely did. And George is in for a very expensive wedding.
Whoops.
Now that I'm getting into George Russell, I feel like it's really important to just kind of talk about how he had really not much to do. I feel like Larry ended up taking a lot of his storylines, literally and figuratively. I mean, George was sending him on all these like big excursions, and I'm glad that we got to see more of Larry. I felt like George didn't have a lot to do outside of his arc between him, Bertha, and Mrs. Turner. So as we left off in season 1, we all know that Mrs. Turner tried to come on to George Russell and he was not having it. But we did not really get to a point where Bertha found out about that. So she finds out in season 2 because now Mrs. Turner is Mrs. Winterton and she has married up, which is why the class dynamic is so interesting and kind of awesome to explore with this season because this is that time where the upstairs and the downstairs are able to merge and become equals. to some degree. Mrs. Turner is now married to this old guy named Mr. Winterton. She does have some money. She is technically married into old money of New York, so she is a part of the academy, but at the same time, because of her past as a lady's maid, she kind of has to run under the radar, and that builds a little bit of tension between her and Bertha that honestly I love to see. And I loved seeing the fact that church and all of her staff was just like on it at that dinner. I was like, yes, girl, get it.
Mrs. Winterton, are you all right?
Why shouldn't I be?
You seem rather agitated.
Well, I'm not.
So as we get into this is kind of where I get into the analysis, because I think that this has something to do with the storytelling purposes that, while are great, still have flaws. If you never actually saw any of Julian Fellows' shows, you may not really understand some of the context I was trying to give you, but I think I can apply it a little better now. The upstairs downstairs style is very much subverted with the Gilded Age, which is definitely something that I found to be interesting because it goes against some of Julian Fellows' initial formulaic, story arcs. I've seen Belgravia. Like I said before, I'm watching the next chapter. I also was a huge fan of Downton Abbey and have seen the show and the movies multiple times. When the show was being advertised initially, I definitely knew I wanted to tune in because I wanted to see how Julian Fellows was going to navigate ability to change one's status and to change one's fate. Because he does come from a place of peerage, I'm assuming that means at the end of the day, we are still going to have sympathetic aristocrats. That's what makes this a little bit hard to digest completely. While this show is about the interactions between the rich and elite, it also is about the people that work for them, like I said before. And when we get to see some of those people become equals to those ethical aristocrats that Julian Fellows is always known for. There's always a villain aristocrat that is very much like the bad person, and then there's always like the good guy, the exceptional aristocrat. And while I don't necessarily think he creates this aristocrat to pander at the audience, I do think there is a pandering aspect to it because we are watching a show about robber barons who were very much oppressing the lower class for labor. And at this time, they didn't have the same workers' rights or union rights that are happening right now. And it's really interesting that I even brought up the WGA and SAG strike because, we just dealt with that. We just dealt with the consequences, and I think we still haven't felt the full brunt of the consequences because now that it's January, I'm noticing it's kind of hard to figure out what I want to see in theaters, what I really want to, tune into on a weekly basis. I find myself jumping between different shows because I can't really commit, and I do think that is because of the strike.
What am I talking about?
Julian Fellows loves to follow a slow burn with kind of a high stake that always has a positive resolution kind of formula. That is something that happens in honestly all of his shows. I think that's why I like his shows. I feel like I'm watching a story that I know is going to end happily. And so I feel like I can go on this emotional ride of drama and reputations being ruined because I know everybody's going to end up where they need to be. Maybe it's because I read way too much Jane Austen growing up, but I just like my predictability, okay? With that being said, I think that in this season of the Gilded Age, Julian Fellows decided to tackle certain topics that sometimes can't be sanitized in that way. And I think that, one, it is the relationship between Bertha and Gladys. Two, it is Peggy and her boss's storyline in Montgomery, Alabama. George Russell's interactions with the union during the strike. And the whole Van Ryn fortune plot.
Not cool.
All of these things came to a good conclusion at the end of this season. And when I said that Aunt Ada was marrying a walking deus ex machina, I meant it, because the minute I met him and Aunt Agnes was just very adamant about him being poor, I just felt like, oh my gosh, there's going to be a plot twist that he's rich and something's going to happen. He's going to get this money back. Because I felt like Maud Beaton's money thing, I knew it was a scheme. I just wasn't totally sure if Maud was a part of it or if Maud was going to just be another victim of it. And Maud Beaton is actually created or inspired off of a real life person. So like, I didn't even know that this kind of person existed. I did not know that there was this scam artist that happened during the Gilded Age. And that is what makes this show really good. But at the same time, this woman, like, Maud Beaton, her character, the inspiration that her character is based off of, left a lot of people destitute. And it just so happened that the Van Ryns just come into money via marriage. And it also just so happens that this husband gets the Dan Stevens treatment, like in Downton Abbey season 1. Yeah, I noticed that.
Sorry. Well, not really.
Even though it sounds like I'm being super harsh, I do really love this show, but I do think that like these were just some things I had some issues with, and I think that this is probably why people might say these things are boring. Because Julian Fellows likes to introduce somewhat bigger question topics like unions, racism, lynch mobs, I think kind of forced marriage proposals, in both the terms of Gladys and Marion, it's hard to sanitize this part of history. And I think that could be potentially why some people don't really like it, because they feel like we're only going to see a sanitized version where the resolution is positive. And so maybe they don't want to tune in because of that. And I honestly understand that, because that is a critique that I have myself. With that being said, I do think, though, that it's nice to sometimes have comfort television. It's drama without the consequence. I think sometimes when we indulge in reality TV, we do forget that these are also still people's lives. Sometimes it's nice to consume that drama a little bit more ethically. And I think it's ethical in a relative kind of standpoint. But I do think that at the end of the day, we are just watching rich people fight each other over really stupid things. I don't know. There's something fun about it. I think it's because it makes us realize that they're no better. And I think that might be what Julian Fellows is exploring in a lot of his storylines. I think he tries to humanize these aristocrats, and that's why there is always this exceptional aristocrat. It's kind of like the enlightened despot, romanticized visage that we're trying to go with. I think that, you know, if you kind of go in with that kind of mindset and you go in with just that lower standard, I think it's easier to just enjoy the show for what it is. It's drama and it's amazing costumes. I mean, honestly, I will let you know, like, even though I barely spoke about the costumes, it's because pretty much every clip that I have in this video has been very much curated to show all my favorite bits and pieces of what the cast wore in this season. And I really loved just kind of how they got a little bit bigger. Like I said, I do hope that season 3 Peggy has a little bit better arc. I'm glad that they ended that relationship with that married man. She had no business near him. Come on now. She's now single and able to, I think, have the suitor entertainment that Marion has been having. And even though Marion doesn't even really want to be married, and I don't think that's Peggy's prerogative either, it would be nice to see her be paraded around, because Peggy does come from money as well. I love the show. I think that this show is amazing. I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are. If you have seen the show and you've also heard this weird, boring criticism, I'm curious to know if you think that my analysis is correct, if I'm missing something. Let's start a dialogue. Let's talk about it. I'm always down to talk about the Gilded Age and any sort of historical drama, honestly. Let me know all your thoughts about the Gilded Age, your thoughts on season 2, and if you have theories for season 3 in the comments below. Make sure to follow me on my social media accounts at CriticalCom with 2M's TV. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Bye, everybody.